get into talking about the Detroit Red Wings. And here's the thing that's, I feel, picked up a lot by national media and by non-Red Wings fans. And it probably frustrates, Hockeytown and Red Wings fans to hear this. But Dylan Larkin and Tyler Bertuzzi are going into the final years of their contracts, and they don't have a deal signed. They don't have an extension signed beyond 2022, 2023. And of course, the natural inclination for folks is to say, well, if they're not extended and they're that important to the team, are they leaving? Are they being traded? What's going on? You add the layer of, Steve Yzerman's not afraid to play hardball with his UFAs, especially the big name ones. It's going to be drilled into your head, but the Steven Stamkos story is the one that's constantly brought up, but for good reason. He let Stamkos walk into unrestricted free agency, literally let him walk into it, and Stamkos came back. He held strong there. So folks are confident that Larkin is going to sign, especially probably Bertuzzi, but I don't think it's insane for non-Red Wings fans to wonder. I will say I now know how it feels when we do that with every other team's pending free agents. Like, I had that pipe dream and I knew it would never happen of Barkov if he ever went, and he didn't even make it close to free agency.
I appreciate Florida doing that a year in advance, so we didn't have to go through the full season of...
You might have punched me.
I was one banging the drum. Like, if you're ever going to spend infinity dollars in UFA, this is the guy to do it on. And then, never even got close.
So let's start with Larkin. And why don't we start with, what's the likelihood of each eventuality? Extended at some point during the season, traded by the deadline, or it goes right down to the wire, July 1 or whatever the date is in 2023. And from there, you see what happens.
I'll go 70, 20, 10. 70, he re-signs. 20, he's gone at the deadline. 10, they just lose him for nothing.
I don't see them losing him for nothing.
You got to think by the trade deadline, Yzerman will have a real good feel, at least mentally, where Larkin's at.
It's important to know, though, his trade protection has kicked in too, right? Like he has a no move clause, or sorry, a no trade clause right now. So he would have to approve any deal.
Which then leads you to believe that Yzerman probably had a really good idea where Larkin was at 2 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that leads into a lot of the confidence. When I said Larkin's probably going to sign, that's the biggest indicator, other than, just the good vibes. But yeah, what do you
I'll
think?
say 80, 15, 5.
That's probably closer to where I'm at. I think I'm still really confident for a few different reasons that Larkin's going to sign. One, you don't get this guy all the way past the signpost or the flag post moment. I don't really know what to call it, where his no trade clause kicked in, where, if you didn't think that this was going to go well, you might have wanted to make a move beforehand. Yzerman just went out and brought in a lot of free agents who on their own individually don't make a playoff or cup competitive roster. And they don't really make sense on their own individually, but within the entire construct of a team and building around not just Seider and Raymond, but Larkin and Bertuzzi. That's the kind of move you're doing if Larkin is staying and Bertuzzi is staying, and you're reasonably confident of that, or at least, most of that group.
I'll agree with that statement on Larkin, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I see where you're going, and I think I'm going to agree with you there too. But in general, yeah, like, you're not bringing in all that extra help, and spending more and being more competitive in a very strong upcoming draft year. If you don't think you're going to keep your second most important player right now in Dylan Larkin. And also, he's the captain. He loves Detroit. The identity of the captain in Detroit isn't some flippant thing where it comes and goes. It sounds elitist, but this is an original six team with a storied history where every single captain, more or less, has a reason to have their name in the history books, often in the rafters and in the Hockey Hall of Fame. That means a lot. That means a lot for legacy, and Larkin has bought in a big way. Michigan kid, he's so ingrained and embedded in the community, and he's seen through this rebuild the toughest parts, and I just can't see Dylan Larkin wanting to leave that. That said, those are all the things that give you a good impression. Also, Elliot Friedman mentioned that it seemed like negotiations were going well. He didn't say anything was inevitable, but earlier this summer he said it seems like things are going well. As much information as you can glean from the Yzerman camp. Read barely anything. But Larkin did, at essentially the 11th hour before these negotiations started, I guess, change his representation. He switched to a new agency, to a group that notoriously gets the most for their clients, and probably GMs and assistant GMs everywhere don't love working with these guys. It's part of the business. It's a naturally antagonistic relationship, but these agents get their clients max dollars.
Yeah, and there's no rush on anything yet. There's several dates throughout this process that I would think would be significant in terms of shifting our thinking on how this is going. None of those have hit so far. The first one, I'll give basically 3 dates in my mind, and one of them's kind of arbitrary, so take it with a grain of salt. The first one's season opener. If he's not signed his extension by the time the season gets underway, that's usually a pretty good indication that there's something significant holding it up. That could be just a no trade clause, not necessarily dollar amount or term, or it could be term, or it could be AAV. I don't know, but something significant.
To clarify, by no trade clause, you mean on the new contract, on the negotiating the protection.
Yeah. Because, most GMs, most players, they don't want the distraction during the season, whether or not people say, well, it shouldn't be a distraction. It is. It always is. We will talk about this every damn week throughout the season until he's signed. And that all of you will be in our comments asking us every week throughout the season until it's signed, which means the reporters in the room are going to be asking Larkin about it every week until it's signed. And every Yzerman press conference will have that question inevitably brought up. So if it's not done by opening night, that's the first telltale sign that, okay, there might be something here. The second one for me would be the day the first trade bait board gets posted. Whenever that might be, mid-season.
Oh, the TSN
whatever. Or the Athletic or whoever. They post a trade bait board.
Oh, God.
Because then we're in trade deadline season with an expiring asset of significant value who every contender in the league would bend over backwards to acquire. So now that's going to be in the headlines all the time. And then you start wondering, will Yzerman entertain that? Will Larkin, with his no move clause, entertain wanting to go to a contender? So if that date hits and he's still not signed, then it puts a whole new dynamic on the negotiations. Because I think up until that point, it'll just be, what's the sticking point? Why haven't they extended? At that point, it's, is he staying? You know what I mean? And then the trade deadline obviously being the final big date, because if he gets past that, still a Red Wing, no contract extension. All right, 5-alarm fire. Something has to give here, because the Red Wings have to extend him at that point, because you can't let him walk for nothing. And then Larkin holds literally all of the leverage.
Man, imagine how Tampa Bay Lightning fans felt during the Stamkos saga. Like, they watched him walk into free agency and literally take meetings with other teams. Was it Canadian Tire that Toronto brought in into that, because essentially they were going to make him they were going to sponsor him, and that was a bunch of extra money. And then
there's no such thing as cap circumvention, though.
No, none.
No, that whole Stamkos saga, though, it was a little different than the Larkin thing, just because Tampa was coming off not a cup, but a lot of success. They were a good team. The teams that were trying to court Stamkos were not.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Tropic Thunder.
Yes.
When Tug goes back over the bridge to be with Half Squat. And then he's just running back as he gets stabbed in the neck. I was wrong. It's like Yzerman saw that coming with Stamkos.
Yeah.
And then Stamkos came running back across the bridge.
Maybe the Red Wings have a great season. Do you think the way the Red Wings perform this season will have a big impact on Larkin's? I just can't see a world where Larkin doesn't want his first and best choice is for this to work out with Detroit in terms of a long-term contract.
No, I do think that is probably his priority. Again, Michigan boy, captain of the Red Wings. If Friedman had any intel saying that the negotiations were amicable and going well, and they got past that date of where his no move clause kicked in, it's like, okay, yeah, we at this point, we have no reason to raise any alarm bells. None. Zero. Hence why I said those dates are what are going to start, because neither side has any need to be in a rush right now for all the reasons that I kind of talked about with those dates. It's Larkin might be squeezing for an extra 200,000 a year. Maybe Yzerman's going, hey, instead of a full no move, can it just be like a modified no trade? Like, who knows what it could be, right? And I'm guessing it's going to be on the AAV, because I don't think Yzerman has any intentions on trading Larkin. I think both sides probably are fully comfortable and want to go a full 8-year. So it's just, okay, well, how much are we paying a year? Larkin's like, I'm your number one center. Give me 10 mil. And Yzerman's like, yeah, but you're like a bottom third of the league number one center. You're just 8. Like, I don't know. So yeah, it's fine. And this is how negotiations work. And Larkin's no dummy. He knows this is going to be the biggest contract of his life. Why?
Hear me out. They trade him at the trade deadline. Then he re-signs in Detroit in the offseason.
For how often that's brought up, it is shocking.
This is
how
a 40
ever happened.
4D chess play. All orchestrated by Dylan Larkin and Steve Yzerman.
Now this all being said, getting to the worst case scenario of this, if Yzerman brings in all these reinforcements to make the team good, and he goes through, the Red Wings have a half decent season, just miss the playoffs or even get bounced in the first round, and then they lose their star number one center. That will be Yzerman's first big abject failure of this rebuild, because you cannot hit the go button and then lose your number one center immediately after hitting it. Like, you can't. Under no circumstance can that happen.
It's like pouring it and then one of your wheels falls off.
Yeah, if you trade him at the deadline and you get a package like the Sabres got for Jack Eichel, sure. It's a step backwards, but at least you're looking, well, look at all these new toys. We're still fine for the next 10 years. Okay, but losing him for nothing? Like, that's just not an option.
If Dylan Larkin re-signed with Detroit after being traded,
Evan, get off this.
I'm not dealing with
would
this question.
and he was made the captain, would he still be considered the ex-captain of the Red Wings, or would he be the X+1 captain of the Detroit Red Wings?
You are asking the real question.
You answer the question.
0.5.
If there was no one named captain,
it's like 14.5.
Do we hold a welcome back, and do we do a tribute video?
That's the real question. Is there a tribute video?
Because I'm not standing for it. You can all stand and clap. I will not.
Okay. Just because, this is a good discussion to have, and I'm really big on discussing all eventualities here that are even reasonable, uncomfortable though that they might be, which still includes the scary ones that Brad and Evan just talked about.
Dylan Larkin traded at the deadline, re-signs with that team for 8 years, traded back to the Red Wings, half retained.
I am going to stab both of you over this table.
That's smart.
The episode's off to a bad start when Evan is nodding along saying something Brad said is smart.
We'll see where this goes.
Okay, let's talk the most likely outcome. And I think we all agree the contract we said, anywhere from 75 to 85% is the most likely outcome here. Make your prediction. Term and years. Term and AAV here.
8.71 times 8.
That's actually very close to what I was going to say. And I like what you did there with the 71.
What I would love to do is do some sort of query on Cap Friendly where it's like you filter out by like centerman, all that, and you get some sort of cap range, because I feel like number one center is all over the map. Like obviously the big teams, their number one center gets paid a boatload, but what does the other end of the spectrum look like?
Well, I think you actually make more than Arizona's number one center right now.
That's right. Did I tell you something? Did I tell you guys that Kyler Murray in football is making more than the entire Oakland A's? I heard something like that.
Yeah.
That is ludicrous.
Considering he was drafted by the Oakland A's. People are wondering if he made the right decision or not.
Yeah. And I think the A's went on a win streak and everyone was like, with such little anyhow. So the evolving hockey contract projection has the most likely term as 8 years for Larkin, and the AAV on that being $8.044 million per year. So just a shade over $8 million a year times 8 years. That's what their contract projection is.
Without doing any research whatsoever, for some reason 8.5 came up in my brain almost immediately.
Here's the thing. I bet, you both brought up really good points.
What was my point?
No, about number one centers and how they're paid and things like that. And I guarantee you, like, Larkin switched his representation, and that's because Larkin knows this is going to be literally the biggest payday of his life, right? He's going to sign an 8-year contract. He's 26 years old. This is his best earning potential for the rest of his days. So he wants to maximize those dollars and make sure that he is equipped with the staffing and the representation to do so. Fair enough. That's what the players are meant to do. So we can assume that the ask isn't going to be, a team-friendly deal as an initial ask, which anyone would be crazy to think that your number one center would or should do that. I bet the ask is, I shouldn't say I bet. Baseless speculation is the ask is anywhere from like 9.5 to maybe just over 10 per year times 8. Because you're supposed to start high the same way, you're supposed to start low if you're on the other side. I think there's a chance they could land at 8 times 9. I would guess that, Brad, you're probably closest with 8.71, but then again, Evan, like what you said with 8.5, that's probably most reasonable.
What would that multi-millionaire do with being short 300K?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, like the evolving hockey projection is just at a shade over 8, so folks might be wondering, well, Yzerman actually came in and he beat the contract projections for most of their major signings over this past free agency period, so why are you projecting over? The number one center thing, the new representation thing, and there's now news from around the NHL. Bill Daly has talked about maybe the cap is going to go up sooner than what they thought. Like, this could be 2 or 3 years. If it's 2 years where the cap starts to rise significantly more than just, $1 million a year.
Drip out of the tap and Kyle Dubas is like got his tongue out.
Wow, that's an image. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
There's, some people would pay good money for that in Toronto for what you just, that picture you just painted. That is going to be a conversation that the agents are going to bring up in the room. And Yzerman's response is going to be, hey, in 24-25, I have to re-sign Jacob Vrana. Don't know what David Perron and Dominic Kubalik are going to be doing. Philip Hronik is an ARB eligible RFA. Moritz Seider is going to be up for his contract, and Lucas Raymond's going to be up for his contract, and that's going to be mega bucks for those guys. So there's probably a tug of war here between the agents saying the cap's going to go up and you can afford this, and it's not even that big of an overpay, and Yzerman saying we can't get into a cap hole. Everyone to buy into this. Look what we built in Tampa. Everyone bought in a little bit for the most part. And we need a little bit of give there because we have these important players that Larkin loves to play with, like Seider and Raymond. You want Momo on your team. We need money to give Momo.
And we don't live in Florida where there's no income state tax and those contracts are actually worth more
over there. Yeah.
Florida.
Then that's working against Yzerman.
Yeah.
Because players are going to be asking for more money.
Yeah.
So,
and it's worth mentioning, we've kind of alluded to it, but like just to point it out plainly, Larkin has literally all the leverage here. He has a full no move clause, and this season walks him right into unrestricted free agency. So if he does not get the contract he likes, now he will get it next summer, and it won't be from Detroit.
I think, again, and we don't know what these players are thinking. We certainly don't know what Steve Yzerman's thinking, but just based on Larkin's career trajectory with Detroit, I see it as way more reasonable to expect Larkin to buy into the give and take and buy into the Yzer plan, so to speak, than it is Bertuzzi based on what we've seen from Bertuzzi's contract negotiations to date. So all in all, I think 8 years is probably what we're going to see. I'd be surprised if it was less. I'd say you guys are right between, 8.5 and 8.75 million. That would be about my guess. I'll go friendly to Yzerman here and I'll say 8 times 8.4.
Yeah, I think Larkin's initial ask was probably in the mid 9s and Yzerman's initial ask was in the low 8s. I split the difference.
I honestly could see a world where it's a little wider divide where Yzerman said 8 times 7.8 and Larkin's ask was like 8 times 10.25. It doesn't really matter. It's all in the margins. I can see a world where it's over 9. I'd be surprised if it was much over 9.
No, yeah, I think 9.5 would be the absolute ceiling.
Yeah. And that's if Detroit's, cap doctors had an inside, or, teams all know the way finances are going. They project, hey, yeah, the cap is going to rise significantly. So 8.6 now is the same as 9.5 in however many years or whatever. So we can afford that, but we'll see how it goes. To me, it's not so much the cap space. It's the fact that you have Seider and Raymond coming up. That's going to be absolutely massive. So I still think it happens. I think it's uncomfortable to talk about trade, how bad this can go, walking him to free agency. All that's horrible, but, it's a possibility until he's signed. But it's most likely that he signs. So that's the easy one. But in all honesty,
thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.